Hello, everybody, and welcome to Teaching Writing in College, where the driving question is, how can instructors in higher education leverage theory, science, pedagogy, and craft most effectively to help their learners with writing? And it's been a while since I've been on. I apologize for that. I posted an episode in early March, maybe about the first week of March, and spring break came and went. And then I ran into a medical problem and needed some surgery. And so I've been trying to keep up with my semester. I've been trying to heal from the surgery. I've been a little bit behind on things. Before the surgery, I had this idea that I wanted to show a metacognitive exercise that I like to do with students. And I've been thinking about it a little bit. I've had it in the back of my mind for a couple of weeks. And I'm at that point in the semester where students are working on their final project out of 3. And it's a really great time, toward the end of any project to do a more in-depth metacognitive activity. But I think it's also good to do it periodically through the semester. Every day, I think something can be done that's metacognitive. So just for example, another episode I would like to do sometime has to do with making lesson plans. And one really good best practice in education is simply to have some reflection, after students have done something or after there's been some sort of class activity. That is metacognitive, really healthy. That can be done, every day. And then also I try to do that. And then also in classes like the one I'm teaching right now, which is English 107. I think I've talked about it before. It's just first year writing for STEM majors. And in that class, we built in some metacognitive components for each larger project. And so there are 3 projects. They write in 3 different genres. They learn a lot of rhetorical strategies for that. I like to have them reflect on things they're doing outside of the classroom, like I've talked about before on the podcast. But then also, part 2 of each of these 3 projects is a metacognitive component where they actually write a deeper reflection of about 750 to 1,000 words. And so some of the reflection I like to do with them, it prepares them for that, but then also it can prepare them for the specific assignment they're working on. So I think I'll follow up with another episode of the podcast with that other one too. It's just that time of the semester, where things are going to come to a close, and reflection is a really important part of that learning as we move toward the end of the semester. So I'm just going to kind of walk through this PowerPoint that I have, but also before I do that, I just have a couple of other things that I want to talk about briefly. One is I also, I listen to other podcasts like a lot of us do, and one that I really like is called the Happiness Lab. So I just thought I would give a little shout out to that. And just within the last week or so, Dr. Laurie Santos, she is at Yale University, and she has a class on happiness that has become very popular on that campus. Students are really curious to know about, happiness and what makes people happy. And the podcast itself also is fantastic. I like to listen to it a lot. And an episode that she just had included an interview with Dr. Rangan Chatterjee over in the UK. And Dr. Chatterjee he's a doctor, but he has become very interested in the question about how people's happiness impacts their health. And in the podcast, he shares some stories about that. And he also has an approach as a doctor that he likes to use with patients to help them with happiness. And these are one of the things that I thought was really interesting here, because it really impacts their health. And he shares, some of the statistics and some of the studies that show that that's the case. But one thing that I really liked that he said was that happiness is a skill. It is something that you can practice. It is something that you can get good at. And so what he has done is he has developed to use with patients. He says that happiness is a stool with 3 legs on it, and you can have 1 or 2 legs and they can help, but you kind of need to have all 3 together to get the most effectiveness when it comes to practicing happiness. And so he says the three legs of the stool are alignment, which just means that your values that you hold on the inside and the actions that you take on the outside, the more those line up, the happier you are. Then there's contentment, a sense of peace or calm. That is something that contributes to happiness. And then also control, people having a sense of control. Even though, there, especially nowadays, there are a lot of things outside of our control. It really seems sometimes like the world is spinning out of control. But if someone can feel like they have a sense of control, even though they can't control everything, obviously, that also contributes to their happiness. And so those are the three legs of his stool. And what he does with patients is he has some exercises, just practical exercises, because people are busy, and you just kind of put these into practice, and they can kind of help you, maintain a greater sense of happiness. And so one example that he gives is that with patients is he has them sit down and write their own happy ending. At the end of their life, what are the three things that they want to be most remembered for? What are the three things that they feel would help them feel the most accomplished? Then he also shares stories about, how in the medical field, when people are toward the end of their life, the things that they value the most are, the time that they spent with their friends and family, the quality time that they spent with them, and things of that nature. And so he has patients sit down and write their own happiness or their own happy ending. What are the three things that would, help them, feel the most accomplished at the end of their life in terms of their happiness, not necessarily, their careers and things like that, even though I guess that could be, but things that bring them joy. What do they want to have spent their life doing? And then the second part of that is, what are some habits based on that story that they can bring into the present, take it out of the future, their happy ending story, bring it into the present, and what can they do every day, just little things that would help them feel happier. And one of his examples was just, having, sitting down and having an uninterrupted meal with his family. He has a wife and two children, but that was one of his, and so he encourages his patients to do that. But I think, the really interesting thing there was how practical that was, and also how simple and how it can be, learned as a skill. And so I thought that was a really fantastic way to think about this episode of Teaching Writing in College, because when it comes to metacognitive reflection, I've thought for a long time now that that's something that can be learned. Metacognitive reflection is a skill, and incorporating that into an education, I think, is really helpful and really important. I've even, I've argued that in previous years, in meetings on my campus about assessing student work and trying to, understand better how our university can serve our student population. Sometimes that comes up, and I'm always an advocate for including metacognitive reflection in assignments, because it helps us see what students are thinking about what they've learned. That helps us understand their learning better, but then also it really has a benefit for students, as we know from things like the Elon statement on writing transfer. And so that idea that it's a learned skill, just like happiness is a learned skill, metacognitive reflection can also be a learned skill. And so I thought that was a great way to frame this episode. And so just one of the things I just did with my students recently here, they're getting toward the end of their project, is in this one, a few exercises. One is I sometimes will show a scene from Moana, the Disney movie, because I think it has a really good lesson about conceptual knowledge. We know conceptual knowledge is an important part of learning, having access to a vocabulary, having access to concepts that help define a body of knowledge. That's really important for learning. You can't learn the knowledge without the vocabulary. The knowledge, I guess, we would argue in rhetoric that the knowledge doesn't exist without the vocabulary, and the vocabulary dictates the knowledge. And so there's a scene in Moana that I think is really, that kind of speaks to this. If you've seen Moana, where she and Maui are on their boat and they encounter the Kakamora, the little coconut pirates who want that heart of Te-Fiti. And Moana is wondering what they are. Maui immediately is worried about this because he knows they're an enemy. They're going to mean harm. And so the first thing he wants to do is leave. And so he jumps into action on the boat and starts shouting directions to Moana about sailing. And I can't even remember what the vocabulary were for that. But Moana didn't know the vocabulary items. Moana didn't know either. And so she stares at Maui with a blank stare. And as soon as, he says, tighten the halyard, bind the staves, or whatever he said, she looks at him blankly, and he knows immediately. And he asks, "You can't sail?" And she says, kind of sheepishly, "I am self-taught." And I think that's just a really great scene because it just shows, she had the lack of knowledge there. And it was the vocabulary that kind of gave that away. So I talk with students about that sometimes, if I can find that clip on YouTube. And so then, we start talking about the vocabulary. I'm always talking about the vocabulary with them. And so here's a list of things that we've done in this class. You can see a lot of points of stasis on there from stasis theory. There's rocks analysis, which I've covered some different times on this podcast. There's other ones that I've borrowed or found over time, like PARC, proximity, alignment, repetition, and contrast. I may have talked about that. That was in the Mike Markell textbook, Technical Communication, and he borrowed that. I can't remember the source that he borrowed it from, but that's a really great way to look at visual structure in writing and visual communication, document design and things like that. Presence from Chaim Perlman, and just all of these different things, familiar to unfamiliar, which I've talked about before on this podcast, for structuring writing, so on, just lots of different things. A recent one I did with students down there toward the bottom on the right of my screen, the last little quadrant down there, source mining. That's, having a source and looking in the references or the bibliography and finding more sources from that to see if they are going to be helpful. Or, reading the original source and noticing, well, here in this review of literature, here's something about XYZ, which I would like to know more about, and then going and finding that in the library. Summaries and narratives are really great little genres, kind of mini genres that can be used in lots of other genres. The penny principle, I'd like to talk about that sometime on the podcast. Detect, elect, connect. That's from Gabriel Solomon and David Perkins. And I really like that one. They're talking about learning and transfer and, what kind of, 3 basic steps that students go through to do that. And I like to bring that right into the classroom and say, okay, we're going to detect, elect, connect. Let's find some of your assignments from your other classes, and let's detect opportunities to use skills from our class in those classes, or opportunities in the real world. Then elect, we got to choose to use them, use the strategies from our writing course, and then connect. How can we connect what we're doing in writing to those other opportunities to communicate? And in that, of course, how to adapt the strategies so that they work out better in that other situation. How do we adapt them to the context, connect them to that other context? And so things like that. So I ask students, which one of these do you feel the best, which one the least? Just a brief sentence for each choice. Why do you feel that way? So I have them do that. And then I give them, in this case, I gave them a little bit of a stipulation just in the draft. I'd like to see 1,000 words for this assignment as a white paper, 1,000 words for the white paper, and metacognitive reflection. That's part 2, 250 words, which might be about a third of what they will be asked in the full assignment, just so that they'll have enough there. I think that when they do a peer review, they'll be able to see a direction, and they'll be able to make judgments about each other's performance on that. And so after that, I just have them choose a strategy to reflect on, because their metacognitive reflection, one thing I like to have them do is name strategies from the course and also define them, because that just helps so much with their understanding. And so I have them choose one to reflect on. Doesn't matter which one it is. It could have been one of the ones that I did ask them, you might have noticed, an evaluative question. Which one do you feel the best? Which one the least? And so on. And that can be important here in a few minutes too. And so there's that. So I have them choose one. They could choose any of them, but maybe one of the ones that they just reflected on a minute ago. Define the strategy, like I just talked about. I'll give them a few minutes to do that, just so that we can practice it in class together. I'm kind of walking through this with them and giving them an opportunity just to practice reflection, because it's a skill. And then, so define the strategy. I just want them to be in the habit of that. And I've been talking with them about that all semester, and I've asked them to do that in previous assignments as well, so they know. How well do you think you can do it? And so give them a chance to evaluate themselves, maybe in a little more detail, possibly. Maybe this question feels redundant to them. This is kind of me also. Probably, I may have skipped a slide before, and then I'm bringing this question back. I can't quite remember now. But then another thing they need to do is a little bit of evidence gathering. I like to have my students point to specific instances of their own writing when they are reflecting. And so provide an example of the skill from your own writing. Make sure it meets one of each below. And so on the left, I've got it's got to be one of these. It's got to be a sample from another class, sample from your real world writing. And that could be, maybe something personal, like, something they would do on Instagram, or, a text to a friend or something. Or some of them, have jobs or other things where they communicate, or maybe they're involved in a club or something. It could be real world writing from something like that, or a sample from English 107, a sample from this class, a sample of the skill. So that's one thing. It needs to be a sample from somewhere live. And then also on the right-hand side, it can take the form of a screenshot, maybe a quote, maybe they'll quote themselves from a previous assignment or something, or a picture from their phone, just whatever it is that they feel comfortable using. I give them a couple of minutes to choose and find something. And then the third part here is write a 200-word narrative, a story about how you used the skill and what the outcomes may have been. And so they're connecting, the skill, the actual, learned skill from English 107 to the piece of writing that they are sharing. So that's where the actual reflection takes place. They kind of tell the story and remember what happened, and maybe what the outcomes were. I'm just trying to prompt them to think in that direction. What was going on there? And then after that, I just what I do here, if I give them some time to write the narrative, just to kind of remember what happened, what all of that's going to do is it's going to prompt them to get to part 2 of their larger assignment, which is, metacognitive reflection. And those questions, there are 3 questions in that part of their bigger assignment. How did you make the choices you made as you wrote the 3 assignments for this course? How well do you think you adapted rhetorical strategies for each of the 3 major assignments, and why? To what extent has your identity as a writer developed and changed during English 107? And so they've got some material based on this exercise that they would then be able to use in that larger assignment. And the things that are going on here I think are really significant. I've got another a piece of literature this time that I'd like to share here and just give a shout out for. So there was the Happiness Lab, and then I also really like this book, Critical Transitions, edited by Chris Anson and Jessie Moore, and it is available on the WAC Clearinghouse website. And it came out in about, I think, 2016, I think was the publication date, and I remember seeing it come out. I really enjoyed it. I read through it once, 6 or 7 years ago. And I like to kind of keep it in the back of my mind because there are some things that are really, I think, important and interesting in it. Lots of great research from lots of great folks, lots of great thinking from all of these authors here. And since we're talking about metacognition, they have a chapter in the book on metacognition, Chapter 8, Cultivating Constructive Metacognition, a New Taxonomy for Writing Studies. And so if we go there to Chapter 8, it's once again a really great chapter on metacognition, really important chapter, I think, by Gwen Gorzelsky, Lynn Driscoll, Joe Paszek, I hope I said that right, Joe, Ed Jones, and Carol Hayes. And if I scroll down here just a little bit, something that's really been influential for me, something that I've even gone to the length of, making a printout of it and putting it on my office wall, is this table what they did is they went through and they defined a bunch of metacognitive subcomponents in a study that they did. And I think it's really great because it gives so much nuance to metacognition. It's not just, reflecting for the sake of reflecting. There are lots of little avenues you can take that define different aspects of students or anybody's really, kind of the learning process that they go through and their development as writers and things like that. And what they say up here is that they've got this just the page before. So the table is on page 226 if you're listening. Once again, the book's name is Critical Transitions. It's available on the WAC Clearinghouse website. If you just Google Critical Transitions WAC Clearinghouse, it's probably the first thing that'll come up. And then there you can go to chapter 8. But on page 226 is where the table is. On page 225, they talk about it a little bit. So what they did is they they went through and they developed a set of coding categories as they were looking, if I remember right, at students' reflective work to kind of identify, these different subcomponents. And so one of the things that they say here that I think is really important is that we illustrate below through examples of each subcomponent, the subcomponent's specificity, let me start over. As we illustrate below this table through examples of each subcomponent, the subcomponent specificity allows us to examine in more detail the kinds of metacognitive moves that appeared in students' written and oral reflections on their texts and writing processes. And I think that's really great because it helps us understand student metacognition in a lot of detail. And the thing that I started using it for myself was just, why not take it and also use it to inform reflection that we ask students to do, and so they can reflect in different ways. And so here we've got knowledge of, so they've got some larger categories, and then they've got subcomponents within those. And so the larger categories are knowledge of cognition, that's the first one, and then regulation of cognition. And so those two big categories. And in knowledge of cognition, they have three parts. They've got person, task, and strategy, where a person is knowledge of oneself as a writer, including one's successful or unsuccessful use of genres, conventions, and rhetorical and writing process strategies. Then task, that's also knowledge of cognition, understanding of affordances and constraints posed by a project and its circumstances. Strategy, knowledge of cognition, knowledge of the range of approaches one might effectively use to complete a project. And also, from there it goes to regulation of cognition. And under regulation we have planning, identifying a problem, analyzing it, and choosing a strategy to address it. Monitoring, evaluating one's cognition and efforts toward a project. Control, the choices one makes as the result of monitoring. And evaluation, assessing the quality of a completed project. And so if we take those and we go back, I was thinking of some of these as I was leading students up to this. If they are doing things like defining a strategy, that might fall under, let's say, a person, their knowledge of cognition, so their knowledge of their self as a writer, their knowledge of rhetorical and writing process strategies. So it might fall under that one for sure, under their knowledge of cognition. It might also, if they've looked at that list of things, we've got a range of strategies that they could use. It might also fall under strategy. So knowledge of the range of approaches one might effectively use to complete a project. That might be helpful. Especially, when I think just, for example, of structuring writing, I've given them, about 5 different ways to layers, I like to call them, of structure. So because there are lots of strategies for structure, and it also kind of happens in layers. There are textual layers and visual layers and so on. And so they can kind of pick and choose what they feel they need to use. So that might be happening in this exercise, depending on where their narrative goes, I would guess. It might be asking them about planning, how they encountered a writing problem and how they were addressing it with a strategy. Monitoring, it is evaluative, and it's asking them to evaluate their work. And maybe the choices that they make will come out of that. Sometimes I see them, talking about different choices or options in their narratives. Assessing the quality, it's asking them that, so there's some evaluation in there. And that could lead them up, eventually to this idea of constructive metacognition, where they are, reflecting across tasks. In this case, that third set of questions there, those 3 questions that I asked in the PowerPoint. Excuse me, let's see. Get those back up. To what extent has your identity as a writer developed and changed during English 107? It's asking them about the 3 assignments for the course. And so at least within the course, it's asking them about their writerly identity, across some writing tasks. But then also, I do like to try to get them to think of ones outside of English 107. And so I try to make sure that I reach across some of those contexts as well. Also, to help with constructive metacognition. And so that's just, I think once again, kind of a skill. The main part of the skill that I'm asking for here, or that I'm working with students on here, is simply the process of choosing strategies to reflect on, because I think that's got to be a really important part. You really have to have an idea of, what the strategy is. That's really important. And then evaluating oneself and applying, that evaluation directly to some piece of writing that they have done. I think that's really, those 3 things are, I think, really important practices for reflection. And so that's what I'm trying to do, just like Dr. Chatterjee was trying to do with those 3 legs of the stool of happiness in the Happiness Lab podcast. So that's where it is right now. There's still a little bit of time this semester before students turn that in. And I'm just going to keep working with them on that. So what I'll do is also, have them choose a few other examples and go through that same process so that they've got some material they can use to answer those 3 questions in their reflection. And, once again, that reflection, these questions are inspired by those, the table that I got from Chapter 8 of Critical Transitions by Gwen Gorzelsky and her colleagues as they wrote this. Once again, it's just fabulous. It helps me understand it so much better. It helps me generate some questions, metacognitive questions, because you don't have to ask the same questions all the time, and you can focus on different parts of the questions at different times. I would say that, let's see, I'll have to think about this, because I do want to share another metacognitive activity that's just about the assignment itself that they're doing. And it's one that it's a strategy I like to use with them a lot, just to kind of get them thinking about it as they're finishing it up. So I will share that as well. And I'll also think about how it fits into this table. It might fit a little bit differently than the PowerPoint that I'm sharing today did, but nonetheless, I think it's really important and really helpful for students. So with that, I will sign off. I will say I still want to talk about rocks one more time. I kind of left that open. I did, I think, about 4 episodes. I still wanted to do a 5th episode to talk about where it came from, because I think for me there was a really great lesson about teaching there too, and I can kind of walk through the history of rocks and how it actually came to be in my mind at least, because it came to be partly through reading and research that I was doing, but also partly through my teaching and some trial and error there, and also some reading about teaching. And so I'd like to come back and share that. I think it's a great little story. I think teachers should reflect on their teaching practices. I try to do that just as much as we have students reflect on their writing practices. So that last episode on rocks that I want to do hopefully is going to do that. It'll be sort of a teaching narrative and a little bit of reflection on my part about how I came up with rocks in the first place. So I'll try to do that in the near future as well. And I want to thank you as listeners for tuning in and listening or watching on YouTube or Apple Podcasts, or Google has changed a little bit. I haven't looked into the details about that, so I'm sorry to say I don't know what's going on with Google, but I know the podcast has been on there too. I need to check that out and make sure that it's going out on whatever resource Google has switched over to. I think they retired Google Podcasts maybe, and they have something else now. I'm sorry to say I can't remember what it is, but I'll figure that out. But thanks to you. I also will just give a shout out to once again to the Happiness Lab podcast with Dr. Laurie Santos and that great episode with Dr. Rangan Chatterjee. And also, once again, the WAC Clearinghouse. They have so many great resources, and they keep coming out with more all the time. There's some really great work going on there, and there has been for years, and so many resources on there. And I encourage you to check that out. And then, of course, Chapter 8 of, Critical Transitions, the whole book, and then also Chapter 8 about metacognition. There's plenty to learn there for all of us. So thank you once again, and I will sign off for now, and I hope to see you again soon. Thank you.